kind of monitoring system, I can understand that. And I understand what's going on in Mecca with that air quality. I was just probably being a little greedy, not only wanting a part of the close proximity, but maybe a partial percentage of the environmental justice due to our low income, and I do believe we do have a high particulate matter here. But other than that, I want to thank you for being here, and anything that you can do as a body to include Desert Hot Springs in the environmental justice due to our poverty level and our known high particulate due to the high winds, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Next, we have Mr. Tom Kirk, representing the Coachella Valley Association of Governments, who's been an active participant in this process to date and will continue to be so, and lead the discussions that involve the elected leadership of the entire valley. Mr. Kirk, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Supervisor. Thank you, Assemblyman and Barry and staff of the district. I know you all know me, but for purposes of the audience, CVAG is the regional agency here in the Coachella Valley that works on transportation issues and air quality issues in conjunction with the district, and multiple species issues and a number of other issues. A curious thing about CVAG is we actually formed with a different name. Our name was the Regional Anti-Air Pollution Authority, formed in 1969 in opposition to an oil refinery that was proposed in the Banning Pass. So curious, we've come a long way. With respect to any concerns I might have, most of them, frankly, have been alleviated. 9 months ago, when it first became clear that the Sentinel power plant would finalize its entitlement, and construction would begin shortly, and mitigation payments would begin shortly, I was deeply concerned. I was deeply concerned that we would get a power plant, yes, a lot of short-term jobs and some long-term jobs, and yes, we would get some reliability in power, but we get the emissions, and the emission dollars, the mitigation dollars, might end up somewhere else. There is still that risk today, but the risk is significantly diminished. And I think the risk is significantly diminished because of the hard work that Barry, you and your staff have done. 9 months ago, we didn't have a map that included environmental justice areas for the Coachella Valley. All of the EJ areas were in Long Beach and San Bernardino and Central Riverside. They weren't out here. So I do want to acknowledge the hard work that your staff put into this. I'm sure that there's some tinkering that may go on with the map, but all in all, I'm satisfied that at least we have designated areas in the Coachella Valley. So on a technical basis, I don't have significant concerns from a staff level at CVAG, but I do want to share some political perspectives, because we still have a long way to go at this. I think the supervisor pointed out, by the way the supervisor is the chair of CVAG this year, the supervisor pointed out we're really in the first steps of this. There's still a public, transparent process ahead of us that will involve public meetings at CVAG, and most importantly, public meetings in Diamond Bar and at the South Coast Governing Board. With respect to that public process, we've been fortunate for 20 years to have a supervisor, the late supervisor, Roy Wilson, who participated as a governing board member. And that was an important perspective that he brought to the South Coast. And it's very important that we have his successor, Supervisor John Benoit, sitting at that table as well today. So I want to thank the supervisor for stepping up to the plate and sitting on the governing board and representing the Coachella Valley. But for purposes of putting the political dynamics in perspective, I want to remind myself as much as anybody else, and particularly my friends in the room, that John Benoit is the only member of the governing board that hails from the Salton Sea Air Basin, in other words, the Coachella Valley. And there are 13 total board members, I believe, one of which represents 400,000 people in the Coachella Valley, 12 of which represent 17 million, close 16.4 million people in the South Coast Air Basin. And as the staff presentation pointed out, 70% of this money could be spent, some portion could be spent west of us. And when the supervisor approached me 9 months ago and said, Tom, I think this money might be made available. And he said, you know, we gotta think about this. We've got to reach out to the community. I want to find out, you know, how best to spend this money. Supervisor Benoit impressed upon me that there are 2 keys to securing all of the money. I'm not going to talk much about which project. I'm not going to talk about which census tract. I'm going to talk about getting as much of the money into the Coachella Valley, because I think that was the Assemblyman's intent. We have a power plant here, we have emissions here, and mitigation funding should stay here. And I think the supervisor put it to me this way, our best chance at our one representative convincing 12 others to access this money is to do 2 things. First, to have a unified approach in the Coachella Valley. Because if we're not unified in the Coachella Valley, it's hard to convince 12 others in Diamond Bar to access that $53 million for the Coachella Valley. And the second thing he impressed upon me is that we have to have a compelling, good use of these funds. And the Assemblyman really stressed emissions reductions. Emissions reductions, that's what you put in your bill. And I think you were sincere about that. And I think what we've got to do as a community is provide a unified approach to the governing board, South Coast, how we ought to spend this money, and make sure it gets spent in the Coachella Valley. A lot of you have heard about one idea that's being floated out there. It's the idea of a parkway that would run from close to here, Mayor, in Desert Hot Springs, all the way through the Coachella Valley, largely utilizing the Whitewater River. There's been a lot of discussion about this parkway concept. The parkway concept may seem like a new idea. The Assemblyman, if he's a little closer to me, could kick me and say, Tom, this isn't a new idea. It's an idea that he and a group actually from the eastern part of the Coachella Valley have been promoting for a number of years. The idea is a regional trails network. What's new about this idea of a regional trails network is actually supersizing. And what is on the plate now is we take a trail network and make it a multimodal network, where yes, you could walk along the trail, and yes, you could bike along the trail, but you could also use a small electric vehicle. It's called a neighborhood electric vehicle. Use that along the trail as well. And the idea is emissions reductions by getting people out of their cars. It's also about congestion relief. For those of you from the Coachella Valley, you know our most congested corridor is Highway 111 corridor. If you take people off of that corridor, put them on a new corridor, we relieve congestion, reduce emissions. The other aspect of this, not really related to the South Coast deliberations, is the health benefits. And we have representatives of the Desert Healthcare District, and we've sat down with them. They tell us that asthma and air quality issues are major issues in the Coachella Valley, but they actually tell us something else, and that the #1 health epidemic in Coachella Valley is actually obesity, and particularly in the western part of the Coachella Valley and the eastern part of the Coachella Valley. And by putting people, giving them an alternative, biking and hiking, we could address that issue too. And the reason I bring up those 3 primary purposes, emissions reduction, congestion, and health, we're proposing at this stage that Sentinel funding be a part of the funding stream for the parkway concept. Not all of it. There's been perhaps a misunderstanding that the parkway would use all of the Sentinel funding and all of the environmental justice funding. The intent is to use a lot of the Sentinel funding for the parkway concept, but to draw upon transportation dollars and health-related dollars to build a comprehensive parkway that frankly is a lot more expensive than even the Sentinel funding could provide. And we think it's realistic, we think it's achievable, and another aspect of this is we're very concerned about jobs in the Coachella Valley. And we believe this is an emissions reductions idea that generates the kind of green innovation that we're striving for in the Coachella Valley and has significant job opportunity potential. My last comment, and this is from Rick Daniels, where are you? Rick disappeared on us. Rick and I probably share one perspective on data collection, because we both ran a little project called the Salton Sea Project. And I know we could do a lot more monitoring. I know we could do a lot more analysis. Some of you, like me, have been out to the Sentinel site. The majority of impacts from that Sentinel site, as modeled by extensive analysis, occur 1,000 feet from the site. And you stand at that spot, if you stand in that spot in the future, and on the worst day of Sentinel, plumes of emissions, or barely plumes of emissions, as the supervisor pointed out, on the worst day in that plant, it will increase PM10 levels 1,000 feet from that plant by 1%. 1%. So we could do a lot more monitoring and analysis. As a Salton Sea guy, I say enough analysis, enough monitoring. Let's take this money and do great things for the Coachella Valley. And with that, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it.
Went out to at that time delay and significantly delay, and at that time potentially bar the building of that asset here in our valley. It was with a great deal of effort that the Assemblyman took the lead. I was very pleased to be at his right hand and carry the bill on the Senate floor and work through that process with him. We frankly were working in a new area because the lawsuit had taken and thrown out the entirety of a process used by AQMD to approve power plants. We were working in the environment that we had 14% unemployment, a power grid that needed this power plant badly, 300 jobs waiting to get started, and a lawsuit over a technical part of the process holding the whole thing up. And I think we both would have agreed to have a broader bill, but the powers that be and the political reality was that it narrowed down to this plant. But we were able to get this plant underway. And I remember at least 2 times standing in hot sunshine with the Assemblyman at press events, encouraging people to support our legislation and help us get this process working. And we had a lot of representatives from cities and counties and labor. Everybody was there. Everybody seemed to agree that it was an important thing to do, but it was not an easy thing. Sure. And working together, we were able to pass that piece of legislation. And as a result, we have today, just on the outskirts of town, a construction job with those 300-some laborers working and highly skilled people out there, many of them, and we will soon have 800 megawatts of power available to the California grid that will make that grid stable. And that concern was probably bigger when we were dealing with this, and the economy was a little stronger. It will get there again, and we will need that power to make sure we don't have blackouts again in Southern California. That was the reason this plant was approved. It was and is a very, very clean, the latest technology, natural gas power plant. And I've seen a good deal of data then and now and recently about these kinds of power plants, and it will emit an incredibly small amount of PM10 and other things that are unavoidable when you're generating power. But this is the cleanest technology of its type known to man at the time it was approved, and it is a relatively small amount. But nevertheless, the mitigation funds were included in the bill, and that's not a unique thing for I think just about any major project like this. There are mitigation requirements, but we certainly have a unique circumstance on it. We'll hear more about that today, about how this funding is designed to be spent. But the process towards deciding how that is going to be spent is an important one, and it isn't. And I'm pleased that we're having this meeting. I fully agree with the need to be transparent and open and air these discussions thoroughly. We began a discussion, and as the Assemblyman mentions, we were in communication early and have been regularly with not only the Assemblyman's office, but representatives of every city in the valley through our regional government, the Coachella Valley Association of Governments. And it's through that process that we've developed some ideas about how some of this money should be spent. But it's just the beginning of the process, and it continues today, and this is a very important step along the way. and we'll hear how that's going to proceed as we move forward through the rest of the day and then eventually through the rest of the process. But I am very, very pleased that the AQMD is here today, and I'm going to turn it over now to the Executive Director and his staff to help us understand exactly what are the parameters and what steps have been taken.
Information from what we call our multiple air toxic exposure study, which is known as under the acronym MATES. And when we've been doing that study, the cancer risks are driven by motor vehicle related emissions, principally diesel exhaust. And what we find is down in the port areas or the busy freeways near the port areas, we get the highest risks that are over 1,000 and 1 million. We would not expect in this community to encounter risks that are that high, so it wasn't a priority in this community because of the nature of the community to be monitoring for that and doing the exposure studies here in the Coachella Valley.
Yeah. Barry, is it possible that we show the map once again that demonstrates the 10% as well as the exposure? So, is there any way we can blow that up there? And when people see that, so you can get a good understanding as to what we're talking about. This is the map that we're proposing. Is that the case, Barry?
Yes, it is. When we look back at 1309.1 and we utilize the methodology that was utilized in 2007 as referenced in the bill, then we produce a map that is consistent with that definition. This is the map that results.
Now, is there a reason, and I know that I've asked this question before, but I think it's important that people hear the response. Why Desert Hot Springs, for example, is not included as an EJ area?
The reason for that is when we follow the definition of 20% or the 10% poverty, and then we combine that with the annual average particulate levels above 46 micrograms. We have 2 monitoring stations, official monitoring stations, where we measure particulate matter in the Coachella Valley. One is in Indio, the other is in Palm Springs. Then we use a computer program to estimate the particulate levels elsewhere in the valley based on those 2 actual measurements. And when we do all of that, it turns out the Desert Hot Springs, for the year that we're analyzing here to produce the map, didn't have a particulate level that exceeded the particulate threshold. Again, remembering that there are 2 criteria to define an environmental justice zone or area, that being the poverty level of 10% plus a particulate level above 46 micrograms.
With relation to the particulate level, though, is that because we don't have a monitoring system in Desert Hot Springs, or at least on the west side of the valley? That way we weren't able to actually capture the amount of exposure?
As scientists, we couldn't tell you if we had a monitor in Desert Hot Springs that we would get the same precise level that we do trying to extrapolate from the 2 stations we do. But we have to operate based on the data that we have. We can't go back in time and somehow measure what the particulate levels were at that time. And what I would mention, and I did mention to the mayor actually before we got started, was that should my governing board define the being in close proximity as 6.2 miles, then as was shown on the other slide, if we can go to the other slide, virtually all of Desert Hot Springs qualifies for those funds. And I think a key distinction I made to the mayor is, and again, let me just preface this by saying that this bill went through, as the Assemblyman noted, at a very, very difficult time relative to this type of bill in the legislature. It was practically a miracle that this went through.
11:45 p.m.
So, I remember it well. So what this means for this particular city is that you're within what the staff is tentatively prepared to recommend as close proximity. So you have good access to that 30% of the funding. In addition to that, as Phil noted, 40% of the funding can be anywhere in the South Coast Air Quality Management District, including Desert Hot Springs. So as a community, Desert Hot Springs actually qualifies for 70% of the funding, even if it isn't in the environmental justice zone. And I think it's also important to point out that, as Phil did, relative to the environmental justice zone, the bill, and I think it was a necessity of trying to get the bill approved, define that zone as within various areas of the South Coast Air Quality Management District. So within the Coachella Valley, but also outside the Coachella Valley.
Barry, at the end of the day, though, there isn't a monitoring system in other hospitals.
At the end of the day, quite honestly, from just my vantage point, and I told this to the mayor, I think they are positioned well in this process.
Question is there a monitoring system in Desert Hospitals? No.
I'm sorry. No, there isn't a specific monitor within Desert Hot Springs. The South Coast Air Quality Management District is 10,000 square miles. And so we would love to be able to monitor everywhere within the 10,000 square miles, but we're unable to do that. And so we pick various locations because we believe they are typical of the general area. And we also, in picking those locations, have to pick locations that help us meet all the federal Clean Air Act monitoring requirements.
So the closest one is Indio? Is that what you mentioned?
Palm Springs.
Could I ask you how many monitors there are, Barry, in the Air Quality Management District?
We have 36 permanent. And when we say 36 permanent, we're monitoring different types of pollutants. So each station doesn't have necessarily the full complement. And I also probably need to mention that the federal assistance for helping to finance the monitoring effort looks like it is going to be reduced. So we're going to have to scramble a little bit just to maintain the existing system. Having said that, we do, Assemblyman, as you know from the work in Mecca, do special studies where if we determine a specific need, we will come in and bring equipment in to help us do a little detective work about the nature of the air pollution problem and solutions to those problems in a given community.
Okay, thank you. All right. With that, we're going to open up public
environmental
comments.
health. I have a PhD in environmental health, and I have a postdoc in environmental microbiology, and I have a kindergarten diploma from this kindergarten right here. So make that clear. What I've done is I have been working with a few different environmental justice groups over the last year or 2 years, and when this this bill came up, and then the Sentinel money and the percentages came up, we were discussing among the Eastern Coachella Valley Environmental Justice Task Force, how to decide what your priorities are. What are all these people's priorities? What are all the health problems, the problems they have, some solutions, and those things. So what we put together is we used a participatory method and gathered together a group of environmental justice groups and some government members and some other representatives from the Eastern Coachella Valley, and we were trying to get some from up here as well. But because this was put together so rapidly, we weren't able to get everyone we wanted to. But nonetheless, we did this. It was a participatory method. We used a method that's published in the anthropological literature as a participatory analysis for community action, the PACA technique. And it's also, we use some things called free lists and pile sorting. But ultimately, the method that we used was for priority ranking. We wanted to rank. We wanted to first identify all of the priorities for environmental justice issues among the group of people that came, and then rank those priorities.
And so I just wanted to present to you, I have a summary right here of what those priorities were among everyone who showed up to the meeting, and that was just on December 31st. There's about 10 different priorities that came up for things that should be worked on that would have an air quality improvement. And these are environmental justice issues that tie to air quality that came up. And again, these are problems. These are not necessarily solutions, health effects, but we tried to whittle it down to one category of topics and problems that are out there. And so that we did, and I can state with confidence that these are what came up. So the first one that came up was unregulated dump sites. And that one is defined as problems such as what they call the Mount San Diego, the Lawson dump site, and then the Western environmental air quality problems that were in the recent news media. The second problem that they identified for this area is a lack of air quality monitors. The third one was the particulate matter and air quality. And the fourth, dirt roads, and then transportation emissions, and then the Salton Sea, infrastructure, and infrastructure is referring to everything from faulty septic tanks to poor roads again. Agricultural practices such as burning, heavy industry, arsenic, and then agricultural field burning, and then the last one was a lack of interest in environmental justice. And those are all the priorities that they came up with. Now I have this. This is the first meeting that we had, and we're only able to address problems, and we weren't able to get everyone that we want in the meeting. But I'd like to do something in addition to this to help talk about environmental justice and what it is and what the solutions are in this participatory format. So everyone has this opportunity to come, and then it's also a legitimate form of data as well. So I'd like to do that in the future. But what I wanted to close with is that the unified approach that some have mentioned earlier today. I think that's very important, and I think that we need to get together and use these types of participatory methods to get this unified approach for the AQMD to present to the remainder of the board to spend the full amount of money in Coachella Valley.
Thank you. Before you give your name again, I'm sorry?
Ryan Sinclair.
Ryan, thank you for that presentation. Can you provide us that list that you gathered?
I have a summary right here.
That'd be great. Great, thank you. Appreciate that.
Supervisor Benoit and Mr. Wallerstein and AQMD staff are holding this meeting. Like I said, my name is Ivana, and I was born and raised in Palm Springs. I have family throughout the Coachella Valley, from Palm Springs, Rancho Mirage out to Mecca, North Shore, and Coachella. I'm here today as the East Valley organizer with Inland Congregations United for Change, ICUC. I wanted to talk about a number of the things. This past year, our youth leaders out from the 3 East Valley high schools, as well as adult and youth leaders from the community of Dream Homes and Clear City, have all advocated for a bike path or bike trail because of its potential to create jobs, education training, as well as create a community green space and those kind of community assets for their low-income communities, in addition to the health benefits. At the same time, we've had residents from our churches. Oh, let me give you a credential. ICUC goes from North Shore all the way out to Chino Hills, Riverside, and San Bernardino. So we're in 45 churches, multi-faith churches throughout this Inland Empire. And in the Coachella Valley alone, we work with about 16 churches in Palm Springs and about 10 other churches, schools, and neighborhoods all the way out to Mecca. So we've also had resident leaders from Mecca who have raised concerns about the dump sites and the air quality in that area. So we see that there are a number of needs. I wanted to publicly honor the work that they have done and ensure that folks that are from the vulnerable populations don't get left out of this decision-making process, and that we want to continue this dialogue and ask lots of questions. The leaders couldn't make it here this afternoon, but they will be there in the Mecca evening meeting. One question folks from Dream Homes had is why wasn't Cathedral City in the bike trail project map?
The path goes from Coachella all the way to the top end of Desert Hot Springs, and that's a very preliminary route, mostly utilizing the canal, but it does go through North Palm Springs and then Desert Hot Springs all the way. We would, preliminarily we would think all the way to maybe Cabot's or some of the northern part of the city destination.
Yeah, I think it's more specific that it runs like along nearby Vistachino and the Dream Homes area, which is where they are. So, but we're just ensuring that we'll have future meetings where we look at those maps and ensure that low-income populations and vulnerable populations are benefiting the most from whatever approach we take here in the valley.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's a good point, and we would also add,
Very much with respect to the Assemblyman and the Supervisor, who's also my boss, when you're putting a piece of legislation through and it's going through with 15 minutes or a half hour to go before the legislature is going to shut down and you have to deal with the other members, what goes through that process, a lot of folks say of the legislature that making legislation sometimes is like making sausage. And so, that's a term I at least have heard used. And so, if you ask me personally or you ask my staff, would we probably draw a definition of environmental justice different to apply for this valley than we're doing here? The answer is yes. And the fact is that the process of the legislature and all the amendments you have to take to a bill and everything you have to do to try and get a bill approved and a signature by the governor resulted in this reference. And we feel obligated, as I'm sure you would as a city manager, to follow the law. But it was such heavy lifting, and I think a great deal of respect has to go to these two gentlemen sitting next to me to get this through, that you have to make some compromises, and there's some unforeseen things potentially, and this is one of them. But if your community, your city, qualifies for 70% of the funding, then to me, as I said earlier, you're positioned well, but the thing you really want to do is get on board, get your projects submitted, make the proposals A++, and to the degree, as the supervisor has said, and this is just my opinion as the chief of staff at AQMD, to the degree that the valley can come to some consensus, then I think it really strengthens the argument that the money should all come to the Coachella Valley.
In all due respect, I'm not suggesting you change the criteria for this project. I think it is, you have what you have, but going forward, I think there's going to have to be a new view. So
we would agree with that for all the reasons you articulate.
Right. We did look at different projects as we began to identify. I think we submitted to the supervisor 53 different air quality projects that we solicited from the public in this community. And they included things like the path. They included reducing energy by increasing energy conservation to reduce the demand, which lessened the number of days the power plant was turned on. We looked at a number of different things. I guess what the punchline of what I want to deliver to you and to this group is, Desert Hot Springs is part of the Coachella Valley. And this valley works very well together in putting together regional projects. And we've received in the last couple of days a draft of a project and a bunch of supported projects. The people in this valley and under Supervisor Benoit's leadership and that of Assemblymember Perez I think that there can be an emerging set of projects that we may make your job easier by putting in a consolidated list of regional projects that are regionally prioritized, and they make your job hopefully easier.
We would appreciate that.
Thank you. All right, well, we'll go to work on that. Anyway, thank you and welcome to Hot Springs. You're always welcome back.
Thank you.
course, it's good to see that now it's coming to a fold, and we're here discussing as to what to do with those funds. Although I like the idea of the trails and everything that that would bring, whether it's jobs, tourism, beautifying our communities, we have to look at the real issues that are affecting our communities right now. We can't turn a blind eye on the realities that we're facing. We have individuals working in conditions that are being affected by pesticides. You have individuals that are burning without burn permits. We have individuals that are being now affected with, as the lady mentioned earlier, Alzheimer's, birth defects, miscarriages, diabetes, high levels of also different cancers occurring to our residents at a young age, and we're losing them. What's causing it, we don't know. Is it the pesticides? Is it the arsenic levels? Is it what we're exposed to? Is it too much sun that we have here? So we need programs to put in place to address these issues. It doesn't do us any good to have these beautiful trails where these individuals are going to come and look at. It's just falling apart. And so we need to first address those issues. We have a brand new school in Oasis, state-of-the-art. Manuel was school board member when all of that happened. And recently, because of these burn permits that have been going on with the growers, all of the smoke got inside of the brand new classrooms. And the students couldn't go into the classrooms, and they couldn't be outside in the playground because the smoke was still there in the morning, because they had been burning all night. What's causing it, we've never experienced this before. Is it new products that are coming in, new items that are being grown in our valley? We don't know, but it's been affecting us for the past 2 years, more so this year. Is it the cold weathers that we're getting that we've never experienced in the desert? We don't know. Again, these are all issues that are affecting us now that need to be addressed. On the school board side, as you all know, Governor Brown is eliminating our transportation funding. And as you know, that our district is very large. We actually go all the way to the Imperial County line as well. We have a school out there. We go all the way to Chiraco Summit. And our schools depend on our transportation to bring in our students. And eliminating this, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how we're going to manage to bring all of our students into our classrooms and be taught. Is that going to impact our roads, our pollution? Of course it is, because you're going to have more people on vehicles driving every single day, as well as more accidents and everything else that comes with that. So how about, what are the possibilities of utilizing these funds to assist us with buses that are more user-friendly? And also installing solar panels in our school districts. We live in an area that has sun almost 365 days of the year, and yet we don't have any solar panels out here. That's one of the goals that we have with the school district, that we are working with our superintendent this year, that we will be bringing in solar panels to all of our campuses so that we can reduce also our energy consumption. So these are some ideas that we need to look at right now. That's the first part of utilizing these funds. This trail, it's great and everything, but that's the second part to it. It's going to create jobs in our area? Absolutely it will. However, do we have the skilled individuals to work in those areas? No, we don't. No, we don't. We don't have individuals trained or skilled to learn to work in that, the green construction, of course, but when you're talking about, green energy and stuff, we don't have people skilled with that, so they have to be brought in. So we need to also invest in our educational institutions to be training individuals so that they can then be employed here and stay here and not have to drive out or have individuals driving in, taking the jobs of those that are living here. Again, different things that we can be looking at. Now, I bounced this idea around with my father today, trying to convince him to come out and talk. And one thing that he said was, how many people in Mecca have golf carts? Only 3 of them do. My dad's one of them. He just bought it and it doesn't work. And he asked me, he told me, you know what, when you go over there, ask them this. Are they going to install rechargeable outlets throughout this trail? Because a golf cart is not going to travel from Mecca all the way to Palm Springs in one trip. So again, that's just an oxymoron question, but I thought it was
That has been considered discussed. They have park and ride areas where people could go, meet, charging stations along the way. By the way, it could be paid for out of other pots of money, but there's a lot of that.
And again, that's a project that would work in some other areas, but not in ours. We need to look at what's affecting us right now. You know, maybe that's a problem that we will be experiencing maybe 15, 20 years from now when our economy gets better and our community starts to progress. But right now we're dealing with floods, pesticides, arsenic levels, you know, unpermitted housing, substandard conditions, and so we need to address those. And I'm hoping that you all are going to be utilizing these funds in an equal way, and are going to utilize them in a way that is going to be beneficial to the community and not to just a small percentage of individuals. Okay, thank you.
Supervisor, you're already talking about the trails, and apparently those meetings going back and forth, and people already have it in the newspaper. Sometimes when the community gets the news, it's a little bit too late, and we don't have the structure to submit proposals the way that that you might want them. What we need is that we need the time frame. We will need assistance for these communities to be able to have a proposal ready for you, because we're apparently really behind when the newspaper already is talking about a proposal and we're just beginning to hear. We're really behind the schedule that you might have. So my question is, will there be assistance to some of the organizations or groups to be able to submit a proposal? Would there be, how detailed do you want those proposals? What is the deadline that we have, the time frame that we have? It is vital for our communities to be in a level playing field if we have assistance, because you're coming to a very poor communities and they have all those monumental problems associated with insolvency, everything that they have talked about, and then you say, submit proposals. Who has the money? Who has the ability and the backing to be able to do that? My concern is that you do provide assistance, and I don't know if through your office, I don't know if through another office that they can do that, but that they are able to participate and have a better playing field. Is that something that could be done?
Absolutely. And we intend over the next 2 to 3 months, there isn't even an offer out to submit a proposal yet, but it's assuming in February, it's projected that the AQMD board that oversees this, which I'm part of, acts, we will then go out and say, now's the time, here's the criteria, please submit proposals. We would love to work with you or any other group, CVAG, my office, in the interim. One of the reasons we're here tonight is to hear proposals without having to write a thing. I've heard over and over again, paving roads and some other issues.
Well, what happens is that you say that some of the roads might be paved and they're not supposed to be part of could not be part of that proposal. Well, how does do the residents get to know what is it, something that they can apply for? We need a lot more guidance for all those organizations that are here to be able to get a better understanding and how to protect their community the best way they can.
We've had meetings already with some representatives of this community. We have more scheduled. If you'll check with Letitia, she can take you the dates and times. And we are beginning this process. We're not ending it. Yes, there's been a number of things that have been discussed. The trail being a pretty visible one, but there have been no hard decisions made, no commitments made. This is all still subject to an evaluation and
Absolutely.
Prioritizing criteria.
But what I'm saying is that there's so much ahead of us, and ahead of the rest of the communities, and I just want to make sure that everyone has a fair playing field, that if they don't have the economic means to be able to, to get the team together there, they would be able to apply. That we have a way of, or a place where they can go and someone can help. Because the ideas are coming, it's just the regulations, understanding the application form, and everything that is important for our communities to be able to get some help.
You make an excellent point, and I don't dispute any of that. I think also just like to add, there is no criteria for which was the first idea submitted either, and the field is open.
I really hope so, and because our communities usually get left behind and get forgotten, and let's make sure that they don't this time.
Let me just add that the AQMD staff is also available to help explain the process and the information that's needed in a proposal. We can't prepare a proposal for any one
But you
entity,
can work with them.
but we can help out.
Thank you, Maria. That concludes the portion in which